Have you ever been told you're too sensitive, like your feelings were flaws instead of signals? Have you ever second-guessed your own memory because someone you trusted said, "That's not how it happened"? This story isn't just a story, it's a mirror, a reflection of the quiet ways control hides in plain sight, and the courage it takes to stop apologizing for feeling everything so deeply. If you've ever sat in silence, questioning your own voice, this was written for you. I still remember the way the air shifted when I first saw him. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder in the sky or spotlight in the room, but something in the atmosphere rearranged itself. We met at a friend's rooftop gathering in early fall, the kind of night that smelled like burnt leaves and too sweet wine, the skyline blurred with amber. He didn't arrive loudly, no grand entrance. He walked in like he'd already been part of the story, calm, composed, quietly charismatic in the way that made you look twice and pretend you hadn't. He wasn't the loudest, but when he spoke, the room curved slightly toward him. And when I spoke, he didn't interrupt or glance at his phone or nod distractedly like others had done before. He listened like it was a skill, like he'd trained for it. I found myself talking more than I meant to, laughing at things I hadn't said out loud in months. And every time his eyes met mine, I felt seen, not in the cheap, flirty way, in the rare, heavy way that made me feel like I was worth seeing. He followed up the next day. A message so thoughtful, so attuned, it felt like an echo of the conversation rather than a continuation. "I meant what I said about the way you talked about your mom. That kind of reflection, it's rare." I stared at my screen for a few seconds too long before smiling, even though no one could see me. That's how it began. Not with fireworks or declarations, but with the quiet kind, of closeness that feels like safety blooming between syllables. We messaged for a week before meeting again, and when we did, it was like the pause had only lasted a moment. He brought me ginger tea when I mentioned a migraine. He curated playlists titled things like Safe Space Energy and slipped little notes into books I told him I was reading. I found a folded scrap tucked into the crease of "The Body Keeps the Score" one morning. "You deserve to feel safe in your own brain." I read it again and again, stunned by how precisely he had tuned into me. It was gentle and deliberate, like he was writing the version of love I had always imagined existed, but had stopped believing was real. We spent hours on the phone, falling asleep to each other's breaths, promising not to overthink what this was yet, but still mapping a future we didn't call by name. For once, I wasn't holding back. I shared the scar tissue of old relationships, the mess of my family, the way I used to stay silent just to keep peace. And he listened, eyes soft, voice low. One night, after I spoke about the time my father walked out during my school play because I forgot a line, he reached across the couch and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You speak like you've healed through the hard stuff," he said. I didn't respond. I just smiled, a small, disbelieving one, the kind that stretches gently across a wound that no longer bleeds. For the first time in years, I felt safe in someone's presence. Later that night, we were curled up in my apartment, the faint hum of the city barely audible through the cracked window. I mentioned something simple, something ordinary, really. I told him I didn't like it when people showed up unannounced, that it threw off my day. He laughed, not loudly, just a little scoff through his nose. "Don't be weird." It hit my ears wrong, like a song going off-key mid-chorus. I turned toward him, expecting him to see that, to say, "Sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But he was already scrolling through his phone. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. He was just being casual. I'd heard worse. Hell, I'd endured worse. But still, something in me shrank a little, not because of the words, but because they came from him, from the one person I thought saw me fully. That night, while brushing my teeth, I stared at myself in the mirror and tried to replay it. Did he mean it as a joke? Did I overreact? The silence after the joke had felt heavier than the joke itself. Still, I shrugged it off. We were still new, maybe he was tired, maybe I was being, sensitive. And then I heard it again 2 days later, when I mentioned I didn't like horror movies. "Don't be weird." This time it came with a raised brow, the same smile he used when he first complimented my voice. I laughed with him, or pretended to, but deep inside something sharp pressed against my chest. A faint warning, not enough to run, just enough to file away. People always think red flags come with sirens and screaming, but sometimes they come dressed as compliments, as gentle touches, as don't be weird. He still listened, still showed up with playlists and herbal tea, still made me feel like I was special. So I buried the unease, smoothed it down like a wrinkle in a dress I couldn't afford to ruin. Because back then, I thought love was supposed to require patience, that every sharp edge could be sanded down if I just softened enough. I didn't yet know that safety shouldn't feel like a test. I didn't yet know that someone could study the blueprint of your heart only to redesign the exits. So when he kissed my forehead that night and said, "You're the most emotionally fluent person I've ever met," I believed him. I believed him because I wanted it to be true. And when I whispered, "I don't want someone perfect, I just want someone real," he looked me dead in the eye, smiled, and replied, "And I'm right here." It felt like a promise. I didn't yet know it was a rehearsal. It didn't unravel all at once. It never does. That's the trick. The erosion is gradual. A soft, careful undoing that looks like affection if you squint hard enough. At first, I didn't even notice the shift. That's how well he masked it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't aggression. It was gentler than that. So much gentler. It was correction. The first time I felt it, we were out at dinner with friends. A low-lit bistro, half-empty wine glasses, the clink of silverware on ceramic. I was telling a story, something silly about a missed train and a stranger's kindness, and halfway through he interrupted. "That's not how it happened," he said, smiling like he was letting me off the hook. "You were crying on the platform, remember? You weren't laughing. You were kind of a mess." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Of course I did. That's how you avoid freezing. You laugh. But something twisted inside me, because I wasn't crying that day. I was breathless, maybe, but not broken. I remember clutching my tote bag and pretending I was late on purpose. I remember the relief when someone handed me directions. That version mattered, to me. But his version painted me as fragile, needy, pitiful, and it stuck. Later that night I brought it up, carefully, like holding a wine glass with a crack in it. "I don't remember crying," I said. He shrugged. "You always misremember details. It's cute." The word cute landed like a coin dropped down a well. I didn't hear it hit bottom. I started paying attention after that, to how often he reworded me mid-sentence, to how his compliments came with a catch. "You look amazing when you actually try. You're brilliant, but your delivery makes it hard to follow." I wanted to think it was helpful. I wanted to believe it was love showing up as honesty. But love doesn't make you shrink to fit. One night, we were getting dressed for a colleague's birthday. I was wearing a black blouse, the kind that falls off one shoulder just enough to feel intentional. He glanced at me as he buttoned his cuffs and said, "That's an ambitious look." I laughed it off, said something flirty about being bold. He leaned closer, straightened the hem, and whispered, "You don't want to be the story tonight, just a part of it." I spent the whole evening wondering if I'd overdressed. My voice grew quieter around him, not in volume, but in certainty. I would pause before sharing my thoughts, rehearse casual opinions in my head to make sure they sounded neutral enough not to spark another, "You know how that sounds, right?" He never said I was wrong. That would have made it easier to resist. Instead, he said I was misguided, that I misspoke, that I meant well but didn't always come off right. And he offered to help, always help, reframing my words, reinterpreting my tone, adjusting my stories. One night, curled beside him in bed, the lamp casting soft shadows on the wall, I gathered my courage and said, "Sometimes I feel like you don't believe me." He didn't turn his head, just reached for his glass of water and said, "You're too sensitive sometimes. That's all." I didn't even hesitate. "I'm sorry." And the moment those words left my mouth, something inside me sank. Not because I'd apologized, but because I meant it. I genuinely believed I had overreacted, that maybe he was helping me, that maybe I did need softening. But then came the silence, the kind that didn't feel peaceful, just heavy. The kind of silence that made your chest tighten even when you were holding your breath. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint, wondering why my stomach churned when everything looked so calm. He reached over, touched my hand lightly, and said, "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm helping you see how you come off." But I didn't think I came off wrong. He smiled at me like I'd just handed him proof. Exactly. There it was, the tidy loop, his entire argument sealed inside one word. I should have pulled my hand away. I should have turned and stared at the ceiling harder, cracked the window open, let the night air wake me up. But instead, I let him lace our fingers together. I closed my eyes. And I let that version of the night harden inside me, the version where I was too sensitive, too reactive, too emotional to understand how to be loved properly. That week, I started rewriting texts before sending them to him. I second-guessed emojis, deleted jokes. I didn't want to seem too much. I wanted to be easy, calm, the kind of woman he could talk to without having to correct everything she said. Sometimes I caught myself narrating stories in my head as if he were already listening, like I was preparing a script he could approve. I started curating myself, bit by bit, smile by smile. The thing is, when someone doesn't hit you, when they don't shout, when they don't slam doors or raise fists, you begin to wonder if the ache you feel is real. You ask yourself, if no one sees a bruise, was there even a wound? But my body had already begun storing the difference. In the way I braced for his responses, in the way my laughter sounded flatter around him, in the way my sentences got shorter, less room for correction. I told myself I was growing, maturing, learning to take feedback better. But the truth? I was fading. And every time I told myself, he's just trying to help, a little part of me whispered back, then why do you feel smaller than when you met him? That voice. It was still quiet, but it had begun. It started with a single voice memo. Not planned, not angry, not even labeled properly. Just a raw little whisper tucked inside the folds of a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at the edge of our bed, still wearing my coat. We'd just gotten back from dinner, and I could still taste the bitterness of undercooked basil on my tongue. The apartment lights were dim. He always said he hated overhead lighting, said it made things feel interrogation-level harsh. Fitting, in hindsight. He had said something over dinner, something small, almost funny. He reached across the table after I ordered dessert and said, "You really going to eat all that?" The smile came after, a beat too late, that practiced grin that was always just enough to make it pass as a joke. I didn't say anything back, just laughed, mechanically. But when we got home, while he went to the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and whispered into the mic, "Tuesday." He said no one else would put up with me. I said it like I was filing away evidence in a storm I hadn't admitted I was standing in yet. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't to confront him. It was for me. Because I had started forgetting, not in the way people forget names or dates, but in the way trauma makes you fold memories like old receipts, half-crumpled, unreadable, thrown to the bottom of your mind. Every time I replayed our fights in my head, I softened his words, took the sting out, rationalized. He didn't mean it lit on. Fuck that. He was tired. Maybe I did overreact. But the tremble in my spine didn't agree. And one night, I needed to know what was real. So I pressed play. It was from 3 nights prior. We were getting ready for bed. I had asked him, gently, so gently, if he could rinse his dishes after dinner since I'd cooked. That was all. His response was soft, measured, and it cut clean through me. "God, you always keep score. You make everything so heavy." A sigh. Then, no one else would be this exhausting to live with. And then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The punishing kind. I'd forgotten the silence. I'd remembered the words, kind of, but I'd forgotten how long he let them sit there, thick as smoke. Forgotten how long he left the room afterward without a glance back. I remember sitting there on the floor of my bedroom, phone in hand, tears stinging before they even fully formed. The audio wasn't loud, wasn't violent. If you played it for someone without context, they'd shrug. He was just frustrated. That doesn't sound abusive. But I heard the weight in his tone, the deliberate chill. I heard me, fumbling to soothe, trying to make him laugh, to lighten the moment he had just made unbearable. That's when I realized. I had stopped fighting for truth. I was just trying to make the silence end. I brought the recordings to therapy, not to play. I couldn't. Not yet, but I told my therapist about them. My voice cracked. It surprised me. I hadn't cried about him in front of anyone before. I'd cried because of him. Alone, but not about him. That felt like betrayal. Like admitting it was bad enough to name. I said, he never raised his voice, not once. And I still feel like I'm always bracing. My therapist nodded. Abuse doesn't need volume to land. Sometimes the softest tone does the sharpest damage. I laughed then, bitter and breathless. So I'm not overreacting? She tilted her head. If your body flinches, that's a record stronger than proof. That night, I lay in bed and thought about that. How the body remembers what the mind edits. How trauma doesn't always show up with bruises or broken furniture. Sometimes it arrives in whispers and exits in silence. I looked at my phone. The voice memo app was still open. I made a new recording. Friday, he told me I ruin good moods. He said he can't even enjoy a movie with me anymore. I had said nothing. We hadn't spoken in 15 minutes. I hit save. It became a ritual after that, quiet and hidden, like a diary with teeth. I never labeled them in detail, just days, maybe a phrase or two. Monday. You're lucky I'm patient. Thursday. Your tone embarrasses me. Saturday. I didn't forget. I just didn't think it mattered to you. He still brought me tea when I had cramps. Still sent good morning texts with hearts. Still told me I was so intuitive it was scary. But then came the corrections, the passive comments, the gentle warping. And I started noticing which days I recorded most. They weren't the days he yelled. He never yelled. They were the days he smiled after making me feel like a burden. The days he joked that I'd drive anyone else away. The days he kissed my forehead after shutting me down. He never outed, I whispered into one memo late one night. He didn't have to. His silence did the screaming. I didn't realize it then, but I was slowly gathering a story. My story. One told in half decibels and unspoken bruises. I didn't know what I'd do with it. I didn't even know if I'd ever listen to them all. But I knew this much. I was tired of rewriting myself, of re-narrating his cruelty into care. I was starting to trust the tremble, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like power. The blue dress still hung at the back of my closet, wedged between clothes I didn't wear anymore and ones I hadn't worn yet. It was the kind of dress that caught light differently depending on how you stood, deep sapphire in the shade, almost violet in sunlight. He once called it a little desperate. I remembered the moment clearly. We'd been getting ready for a gallery opening, and I came out of the bathroom feeling almost beautiful. Not in the subtle way he always preferred, but in the bold, look-at-me kind of way. He had blinked once, then tilted his head. That's what you're wearing? The words were nothing on paper, but tone could dismantle you. It's just loud, he added with a smile that felt like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't written. I didn't wear it again. Until that night. We were supposed to attend a friend's engagement dinner. Not someone close to me. Just enough of a friend that skipping would be noticed, but not missed. And maybe that was why I chose the dress. Maybe it was the safety of being seen, but not known. Or maybe I just needed to remember how it felt to choose myself, out loud. I slipped it on slowly. The fabric clung to me in places I had forgotten were still allowed to feel beautiful. The mirror didn't offer reassurance, but it didn't offer judgment either. I stood still, mascara wand trembling just slightly in my hand, as if waiting for something to stop me. Nothing did. He was in the hallway, scrolling through his phone, when he looked up and saw me. His eyes flicked up, down, then settled somewhere near my collarbone. "You're really going out like that?" Flat, unblinking, no smile this time, just a verdict. I didn't blink either. I reached into my coat pocket and pressed record. My fingers didn't tremble. They'd done this enough times now to know the ritual. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, not defensive, just curious enough to let him dig his own grave. And he did. It started with a sigh. Then came the words, each one carefully spaced, each one soaked in a kind of polished disgust that didn't sound like yelling but echoed louder than any scream. "You want to be the center of attention so badly, don't you? You exhaust people. You drain the room. You dress like this and act surprised when people pull away. You ruin good things. You make me dread coming home." He didn't even pause to see if I flinched. He wasn't speaking to me anymore. He was speaking at the idea of me, the one he'd reshaped, chipped at, silenced. I didn't say anything. I didn't fold. I let the words settle around me like ash. And when he finished, when the silence fell like it always did, I calmly reached into my pocket and tapped the screen. File saved. That night, I didn't ride in his car. I took a cab. I arrived 5 minutes before him. I laughed louder than I needed to at a stranger's story. I complimented the hostess's earrings. I sat at the far end of the table, not next to him. When he walked in and saw where I was sitting, his jaw tightened. Just a flicker. Most people wouldn't notice. But I wasn't most people anymore. I had trained myself to read every tick of his expression. I saw the storm behind the stillness. He slid into a seat across the room. He didn't look at me all evening, not even once. But I felt him watching. And for the first time, I let him. I didn't shrink. I didn't fidget with my fork. I didn't lower my gaze. I smiled when I wanted to. I tilted my head toward warm conversation, and I wore the dress, fully, boldly. Someone at the table complimented it. "That color's magic on you," they said. "Thank you," I replied, steady and soft. I needed a little magic tonight. I could feel the heat of his attention from across the room, and I didn't flinch. Because he had spent so long sculpting a quieter version of me, one that would never wear this dress again, never speak too brightly, never take up too much space. And yet, here I was. Later that night, after dessert was cleared and people started to leave, I stood alone by the coat rack, waiting. He approached, slow and careful. "You were quiet tonight," he said, even though I hadn't been. I had a lot to think about. His brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't need to explain itself. "I wore the dress you hated," I said, "because I needed to remember how it felt to choose myself." His mouth opened, just slightly, but no words came out. I turned and walked away before he found any. In the cab home, I replayed the audio, not because I needed proof. I had long stopped needing that. I replayed it because I wanted to remember the moment the mask slipped, the exact cadence of his voice when he told the truth without realizing it. Because that 5-minute monologue wasn't a confession. It was a mirror, one he'd been holding up to me for years, only now I'd turned it back around. And for once, he had to look. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, right as I was stirring tea that had already gone cold. My phone buzzed once, my friend's name flashing across the screen with the kind of urgency that made me instinctively brace. I answered expecting crisis. Instead, I heard, "Please tell me you're free tonight. One of the panelists dropped out last minute." I blinked. "Panel?" "It's the podcast taping, the one on surviving toxic relationships, remember? You said you'd come watch." I hadn't planned to speak. Watching felt safer. "They need someone who gets it," she said gently. "You don't have to say yes. Just think about it." I didn't think. I heard myself say yes. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the blue dress still hanging on the door from last week. Maybe it was the file I kept replaying late at night, not to torture myself, but to remind me I hadn't imagined it. I pulled on a sweater, layered gold over my collarbone, and walked out without a script. My hands didn't stop shaking on the train. Every station blurred into the next. I thought about turning back twice. I didn't. The venue wasn't much, just a community arts space with folding chairs and exposed brick that smelled like dust and ambition. 20 chairs, one mic, a pitcher of water and paper cups that curled at the edges. I waited behind the curtain while the host introduced me. Our next guest is here to share something that many of us don't talk about enough: emotional manipulation and the gray spaces between love and control. I stepped out into the soft lighting. The mic felt foreign in my hand. My heartbeat drowned out the shuffle of the audience. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't explain. I opened the file. The first few seconds were just ambient noise, then his voice. "You want to be the center of attention so badly, don't you? You ruin good things. You drain people. You make me hate coming home." The room didn't move. No one breathed. I didn't look up. I stared at the mic stand as if it might collapse. My hands stayed perfectly still, but I could feel my knees threatening to give. Not from fear, but from the weight of finally being heard. When the audio ended, there was silence, not the kind he used to weaponize. This silence felt holy, witnessing. Then a voice from the back, quiet, almost breaking. "That was your boyfriend?" I nodded once. Someone whispered, "Jesus." I scanned the room slowly. One woman had tears brimming but not falling. Another had her fists curled in her lap like she was holding herself still. A man near the back muttered something that sounded like unbelievable. And I realized, in that breathless moment, that I wasn't just proving something to them. I was proving something to me. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't overly sensitive. His voice, so calm, so cold, was now a matter of public record. I didn't speak. I let his words do it for me. And somehow, it was the loudest I've ever been. I felt a strange kind of stillness settle into my bones. Not peace, not yet, but presence. The kind of presence that comes when you stop making yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. When the host finally stepped up beside me, she didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and gently took the mic from my hand. And still, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because this wasn't the kind of grief that spilled over. It was the kind that settled deep and rewrote you. Afterward, 3 women came up to me. One said, "I had that same voice in my house for 3 years. Another just hugged me. The third handed me her number and said, 'If you ever want to burn it all down, I've got matches.'" We laughed. Too hard, too suddenly, but it felt good. Honest. I stepped outside into the night air and exhaled so deeply it felt like I was purging something ancient from my lungs. My phone buzzed again. His name. I didn't open it. Then again. Then again. I knew without reading them. I knew what the words would say. Knew the pattern. The panic masked as rage. The guilt masquerading as shame. But I didn't feel the need to respond. Because for once, I wasn't trapped inside the echo chamber of our dynamic. I was outside of it, watching it collapse from a distance. When I finally did read the messages, I was already on the train home. "You really aired private stuff like that? You made me sound like a monster. You're insane." 3 texts. No apology, no recognition, just more deflection, more control disguised as indignation. I backed up the files to 3 separate drives. Then I blocked his number. I got off the train and walked the long way home, past the lit-up bakery that always smelled like cinnamon, past the bookstore with a window full of underlined poetry. I walked like I had somewhere better to be than where he was. And for the first time in a long time, that was true. The first text came before I'd even brushed my teeth the next morning. My screen lit up with his name, the familiar tension rising in my chest like a reflex, an ache I used to confuse with longing. I didn't open it right away. I watched the notification fade from the lock screen, then set the phone down, face first, on the table. I let the silence stretch. Let the space between reaction and response become a boundary. When I did check it, hours later, after 2 cups of coffee and a long, deliberate walk through the flower market, I already knew what I'd find. You aired private stuff? Followed minutes later by, you really made me look like a monster. Then, like clockwork, you're insane. No apology, no curiosity, no question about why. I almost laughed at the predictability of it, the cycle unfolding exactly as I'd documented it for months. First shock, then blame, then insult, and all of it, still carefully avoiding accountability. I sat on the couch, legs folded beneath me, rereading the texts as if they were chapters of a book I'd finally stopped pretending was fiction. There was a time when messages like these would have unraveled me, sent me spiraling through threads of self-doubt and self-blame. Maybe I should have told him first. Maybe I did make him sound worse than he is. Maybe I am crazy. But this time, I didn't spiral. I didn't feel guilt. I felt cold clarity, a strange, unexpected stillness. Because for once, I wasn't the one unraveling. He was. And I had the file. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the voice memo. Not out of spite, not for proof. Just to remind myself that I had lived through it. That I hadn't imagined the weight of those words or the precision with which he'd carved them into me. You ruin good things. You drain people. You make me hate coming home. Hearing it again now, without the panic, without the desperate scramble to decode or defend, it hit differently. It sounded smaller, hollow almost, like a child pounding on a locked door, unaware the house was already empty. I backed up the file to 2 cloud accounts and an external drive. Not because I was afraid of losing it, but because I wanted to make sure the truth lived in more than one place. After that, I opened my contacts, found his name, paused, not for sentiment, just stillness. Then I hit block. A quiet blink of finality. My phone, now silent and unreachable, buzzed once more, one last stray echo before the line went dead. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. That night, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I didn't cry. I didn't drink wine in defiant solitude or burn old pictures like some cinematic declaration of freedom. I made noodles, the instant kind, curled up in bed with a hoodie 2 sizes too big, set my phone to airplane mode and watched 3 episodes of a trashy reality show where no one gaslighted anyone. At some point, a meme popped up in a group chat, something ridiculous about horoscopes and crying in grocery store aisles, and I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was that funny, but because the sound of my own laughter felt foreign, and I needed to let it out to remember what it sounded like. Then I pressed play again. The same file. The same 5-minute monologue that had once taken the breath out of my lungs. Now, I listened with a kind of detached reverence, like watching a storm on a screen from inside a warm room. And I whispered aloud, as if answering him back for the first time. I didn't make you sound like anything. I just stopped muting the truth. I traced that sentence with my breath, repeated it once more. Then I tucked it away like armor. Outside, the sky cracked with soft thunder, the kind that doesn't threaten, just reminds you it's still there. I pulled the blanket tighter and let the dark hum around me. He would spiral. He already was. He'd try to rewrite the story, cast himself as the victim, craft new versions where I was vindictive, irrational, unstable. Let him. I wasn't in the story anymore. And whatever version he told, I knew mine had teeth, voice, memory, evidence, truth. I closed my eyes, not to forget, but to finally rest. Not from him, from surviving him. And for the first time, that difference mattered. It wasn't an explosion, no dramatic confrontations, no text threads leaked in group chats. No one staged an intervention or posted vague Instagram stories about betrayal. The shift came slowly, like dust settling after a long storm, revealing what had been cracked beneath it all along. The people who once said, "He's such a good guy," stopped saying anything at all. It started with silence, muted reactions, delayed replies, conversations that avoided his name like it had grown too heavy to carry, The friend who used to tease me with, "You're lucky he actually listens," didn't comment on my posts anymore. Another, the kind who always played devil's advocate, liked a quote I reshared, one about invisible wounds and the voices we silence to keep peace. And then there was Alex. We'd been at the same party, accidentally. A mutual friend's birthday, rooftop again, string lights sagging slightly in the humidity. He was talking to someone near the drinks table when he saw me walk in. For a second, he smiled out of habit. Then his eyes shifted. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just turned back to his glass and pretended I wasn't there. Later that night, as I stood by the railing with a ginger soda in hand, he walked past me and muttered under his breath, "I always had a weird feeling about him." It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. A crack in the facade, a moment of acknowledgement from someone who used to joke that I overanalyzed everything. A week later, at the bookstore we all used to frequent, him especially, I ran into Claire, a mutual friend who once told me I was lucky to have someone so emotionally intelligent. She glanced up, startled, then quickly looked back down at the poetry book in her hands. I waited for her to say something, anything. She didn't. I almost walked away, but my feet stayed rooted. Maybe I needed her to say it, needed her to finally see me. She finally spoke, quiet, tentative. "You never said anything." I exhaled slowly, not with anger, with history. "I did," I said. "You just didn't listen." Her mouth opened slightly, but there was nothing left to say. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't before, not clearly anyway, that the world hadn't turned kinder, it had turned quieter, and in that quiet, my truth had started to echo, not loud, but steady. I wasn't healed, not yet. Some days I still triple-check my tone before replying to a text. Still catch myself rehearsing opinions like I'm prepping for cross-examination. But I don't shrink anymore. Not in the rooms he once filled, not in the stories they still told about him. Because I know what's real. And when you know what's real, you don't need a chorus. You just need one voice. Yours. There was a time I would have avoided his name in conversation, would have smiled politely when people praised him, would have sat through the discomfort in order not to make others uncomfortable. But now I let the silence sit. Now I let the discomfort belong to someone else for once. It's funny. Vindication doesn't come with applause. It comes in glances, in avoidance, in the things people don't say. He still goes to the same coffee shop. I don't avoid it anymore. I sit in the corner with my laptop, headphones in, playlist on low. If he walks in, I don't look up. I don't have to. His presence doesn't carry weight in my lungs anymore. I saw him once, hesitate at the door. Our eyes didn't meet, but I felt the pause, felt him notice I was there, and then he left. That's what truth does. It doesn't chase, it holds its ground. He may still tell his version, cast himself as misunderstood, framed, undone by someone too emotional, but he tells it with less confidence now, because even in rooms I haven't spoken in, my silence has started to fill the space he used to control. I didn't need revenge. I needed the air to clear. And it did. Not dramatically, not loudly, but thoroughly. Because when you spend enough time being doubted, being minimized, being rewritten, you stop needing validation. You start recognizing power in knowing. And I know. I know what happened. I know what I recorded. I know what I survived. I know who looked away. And I know who looks differently now. They don't always say it, but I see it in how their smiles falter, how their eyes linger just a little longer, how their sentences trail off before they say his name. And maybe that's enough. The room didn't get kinder. It got quieter. And in the quiet, my truth finally echoed. Someone asked me recently why we broke up. Casual setting, friendly voice, no judgment in their tone, just curiosity dressed as concern. I smiled, not out of habit, not to deflect, but because the answer had finally settled into my chest like something I could hold without shaking. Because love doesn't erase you, I said. That was all. No monologue, no evidence, no voice memos or stories recounted in soft, trauma-coded tones, Just that single sentence. And it was enough. There's a moment that comes, quietly, after survival, where the retelling stops being necessary. Not because the story doesn't matter anymore, but because it's no longer the only way you believe yourself. You don't need the room to nod in agreement. You don't need the gasp, the validation, the "I'm so sorry that happened." You already gave yourself what no one else could. Belief. I still flinch sometimes. Not dramatically, just a subtle tightening when someone says, "You're being too much." I hear those words like a ghost brushing past my spine, but I don't run from the shiver anymore. I hold it, examine it, respect it, because now I know what it means. It means I've lived through being too small for too long. It means my body remembers what my mind was taught to forget. It means I'm still learning where I end and where someone else's control begins. And that flinch, that old reflex that once made me question my worth, it's sacred now. A boundary my nervous system built before I even understood what a boundary was. He used to say I was too sensitive. He said it like a flaw, like a leak in the boat I was supposed to patch up quietly so I didn't inconvenience him with my feelings. For a long time, I believed him. I thought my tears were proof of imbalance, that my intuition was paranoia, that my questions were conflict instead of care. But now I know that sensitivity is the reason I survived him. It's why I noticed the tone shifts, why I caught the sideways digs, why I recorded what others couldn't see, why I walked away when the world still clapped for him. Not everyone claps for me now, and that's okay. I don't need the applause. I don't need every room to echo with praise or understanding, because I heard myself first. I heard the tremble in my voice when I started saving his words. I heard the quiet courage in my silence at that panel. I heard the firm breath I took when I hit block and never looked back. And in a world that demands women soften to be safe, I've learned to protect the parts of me that are sharp with memory. I've learned that grace doesn't mean silence, that softness doesn't mean surrender, that being too sensitive was never the problem. It was the answer. Now when I speak, I don't shrink. I don't ask for permission to take up space with my truth. I don't translate my pain into something palatable just so others can digest it without discomfort. I tell it in my own language, on my own terms. When someone asks what happened between us, I don't tell the story. I tell the result. I left because I stopped believing him more than I believed myself. It's strange what clarity feels like. Not like victory, not like revenge. Like stillness, like waking up in your own skin after months of living in someone else's version of you, like walking into a room he once filled and realizing you no longer brace for impact. That's the quiet power of reclaiming yourself. Not everyone will understand it. Not everyone will want to. Some will call you bitter, dramatic, still too much. Let them. Let them shrink from the version of you that finally knows what her gut was saying all along. He said I was sensitive. He was right, and that sensitivity saved my life. Sometimes survival doesn't come wrapped in grand gestures. It arrives in quiet decisions, like saving a voice memo, or finally wearing the dress he hated, or refusing to explain yourself anymore. This story reminds us that being too sensitive is not a weakness. It is the wisdom of a heart that refuses to go numb. So now, we turn to you. Has anyone ever used your sensitivity against you? And how did you reclaim it? Drop your story in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe if you felt seen in this story. Because here, your sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's your superpower.